Hi everyone, and welcome to my home. I am Victoria Wilder, author of the upcoming novel Lullaby of the Lilitu, which will be available May 26th. At the time of recording, that is almost a month away. By the time this comes out, it'll probably just be a few days or a week away, so be excited. Today I wanted to talk about writing unstable characters. My main character in Lullaby of the Lilitu, Rio Sylvain, is an unstable character. We hear a lot about different kinds of characters that are going through, generally most writers want to put their characters through something terrible so that they can get through it and be different by the time they come out, by the end of the book. And so I basically did that. But I did look at a lot of different behavioral things that unstable people or people who are considered unstable may experience. A little disclaimer, when I say unstable, I don't mean to offend anyone. I don't mean to say, because you have a mental illness or some sort of personality disorder or anything like that there's anything wrong with you. Unstable just means, in the literal sense, that her emotions can go from one end of the spectrum to the other
very quickly.
I chose to use an unstable character because she was kind of based on me. I know, everybody hates it when a writer bases a character on themselves, and I guarantee you that Rio is very, very different from Victoria. Rio, she does a lot of things that I don't agree with, and she behaves in a lot of ways that I don't agree with. But the truth is that when I was 21 years old or younger, I did a lot of the same stuff. It's only in hindsight that I realize the problems with my behavior. It's only in hindsight that I see those moments of great instability that I faced when I was younger, and I still am overcoming a lot of those things. So I didn't write Rio as an unstable character specifically just to say this is what unstable people are like, this is what people with certain mental illnesses are like. And if I had to diagnose her, I would probably say she is dealing with some post-traumatic stress. She also specifically has had some actual diagnoses within the book that I did research a lot, because that specific diagnosis is not something I had experience with. I don't want to go too much into it because it could be a spoiler, so I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is, but a lot of her behavior does come from that diagnosis and from the possible borderline personality disorder that I have experienced my whole life. I was diagnosed bipolar, and the older I get, the more I realize that was very much just the tip of the iceberg for me. And now I am going into therapy and doing a lot of personal practices that are helping me to overcome my own mental situation and my own unstable emotions. And again, I don't use unstable to offend anyone or bother people. It's just a very general term for what our emotions do. How I could go through one day being just fine, and then I'm kind of in a rage like an hour later over nothing important, and then like an hour after that I'm fine again, or I'm actually ecstatic or happy, or I'm sad and crying. There are a lot of emotions that go through it, and that is why the diagnosis originally was bipolar, because of the emotional shifts. But then there are so many other things that let me know that many of my relationships and many of my experiences were due to or fall in line with the experiences of someone who is officially diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So Rio also falls in line with that. And I went through the editing process with an editor that I don't feel like I would work with again. I don't think I had the best experience with my editor, and that video should be up by the time this one comes up. So that I do talk more about that whole experience. But one of the things that stood out to me was she noticed that Rio was unstable. She noticed that there were these emotional problems. And even though Rio's diagnosis is specifically mentioned in the book, and it's later on in the book, it's like a reveal to Rio, you know now. Even though that is mentioned, she still was confused about why Rio was that just cat hair that just like flew over my head? Did you see that? Sorry. But she's still confused about why Rio is emotionally imbalanced. And even though, you know, people mention it, it's very clear that Rio is emotionally imbalanced. She has a problem with the imbalance in general. And her reasoning, and forgive me because it made me so angry, so I'm going to take a breath. Her reasoning was that she didn't know many people who were neurodivergent. She didn't have that much experience with those people, so they're obviously not very common, and maybe it needs to be explicitly stated much earlier in the book. And honestly, I guess, you know, that floats some people's boats, that's great. But for me, it was really about, especially because most of the book is in Rio's point of view, it's about her discovery of this. So her emotions, her behavior, they're not something that she necessarily understands herself until much later on. So it would be difficult to try to force the idea into the reader's head when you're supposed to be in her mind. And in her mind, this is just life. This is just her personality. She has emotions. She's feeling things. Sometimes her responses are sudden. Sometimes she's suddenly angry about something that, you know, she wasn't angry about in the previous chapter. There's a scene in the book, and I'm going to try to explain this with no spoilers, where Rio finds something out about someone else in the family. Later on, when she sees that person, she's angry about it. I think that's a perfectly normal response. If you find something out that makes you kind of question things, and then you actually see the person that thing you found out about, you know, you see that person's face, you're in the room with that person for the first time after finding that information out, then you're going to respond emotionally then, not necessarily when you first get the information. Some people take time to process. And because I am a neurodivergent person, I'm pretty sure I'm on the autistic spectrum. I've been in and out of therapy most of my life, and these are things that no one really asked about, and I didn't really learn about until I was older, until I was an adult, and now I'm trying to explore them and understand them. And, you know, I have things that tell me that I definitely fall in line with these diagnoses, and I don't suggest anyone self-diagnose themselves. That's not what I'm saying, but I've done a lot of research, and like I said, I've been in and out of therapy, and I've spoken to a lot of therapists, and so I am confident in my thoughts that even without an official diagnosis yet, that I am on the autistic spectrum and very high functioning, and that I've probably been dealing with borderline personality disorder as well as or instead of the bipolar that I was diagnosed with. Again, don't self-diagnose yourself, but I've done a lot of research on these topics, and the characters that I write tend to see the world very similarly to the way I see it, or to the way that I think a person in their position might see the world. I use a lot of things like The Emotional Wound Thesaurus. It's a great book for writing characters who are dealing with emotional problems or mental illness. There's also, of course, the Basic Emotion Thesaurus, which is written by the same people. It's in this whole series. Actually, this whole series is great. You should check it out. The Thesaurus series. I have the Emotion Thesaurus here. Right? So this is a wonderful, wonderful book for writing characters who are going through emotional changes. And even if it's not like something as extreme as Rio's, because I write a lot of characters who don't have the same kind of mental changes, or don't go through the same mental changes that she goes through. I write a lot of characters that are, you know, pretty neurotypical. They're what you'd expect a character to do. They're who you'd expect them to be. And many of the characters in Lullaby of the Lilitu are neurotypical. They're not going through what she's going through. They don't have the same kind of emotional changes, emotional whirlpool that she exists in, that I once existed in, that I still sometimes have to fight my way out of. If you're writing an unstable character, really consider where they're coming from. Really consider the actual behaviors of someone who is dealing with a certain sort of problem. Someone has post-traumatic stress disorder. They're going to behave in certain ways when faced with triggers, okay? Many people with mental illness have triggers. I certainly have them, and I've had to become very aware of them over the last 5-10 years, just to kind of find some stability for myself, find some emotional stability, to be able to pursue writing as a career. This is something I was working on this book for so long, and I didn't get through it because a lot of my problems were internal. A lot of them were mental, emotional. There was a lot of fear, there was a lot of worry, there was a lot of self-sabotage, a lot of self-destructive behavior. It really characterized my adolescence and my early adulthood. I was very self-destructive and very emotionally unstable. I was unwell. I was not, I was angry a lot for the wrong reasons. I was sad a lot and uncontrollably, I had problems. And I still have some very strong abandonment issues and very strong personal filters that I have to try to push my way through so that I am not so I can try not to be a judgmental person. And so a lot of me went into Rio. A lot of me went into making her the kind of wild, emotionally unstable kind of person that she is. And the difference between us is that I have done a lot of the work to overcome these things. I'm still doing a lot of the work to move through these things. Rio, not so much. It's just kind of a part of who she is. She accepts it as who she is, and she's not really at this point where she's ready to look deeply at herself. Yeah, she does spend a lot of time kind of questioning her behaviors and questioning the life that she's living and questioning the choices that are laid in front of her, but for the most part, she just kind of goes with the flow of a lot of things, and a lot of her choices are based on that mental issue that she's got. I want to say mental illness. My problem with that is I don't know. I feel like the term mental illness makes people feel like they're victims. Having a mental illness is something that they can't possibly try to overcome or try to heal through. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that whole sentiment. Anybody who does that really kind of bothers me, because when I think about where I was, when I think about the mental illness that I've experienced and the way it's affected my life and affected me, and how many times I've been self-destructive, how many times I've harmed myself, how many times I've told myself that same lie, that I can't get through this, that this is just who I am, this is just me forever. I think about that, and then I think about when I started to deny that, when I started to say, okay, that's bull, I can get through this, I can heal, I don't have to be depressed all the time, I don't have to be scared all the time, I don't have to feel like every day is an opportunity to die, I don't have to feel like, my life is covered in a cloud of doom forever. I don't have to embrace that. Those are just stories I'm telling myself. When I really started to realize that, I started to kind of heal and get better and better understand my own mental state, better understand my own emotional state. And that's helped me to really see that healing is possible. It's something that takes work, it's something that's hard, and it may be a lifelong journey. I certainly feel like it may be a lifelong journey for me, that I am always growing, always learning, always trying to heal, but it is possible. So when I started to really understand that is when I was actually able to finish my book. That is when I was able to start actually writing it consistently and regularly. That was when I was able to start really seeing the possibility of having a better future, because I let go of all those lies I was telling myself. Actually I wrote a blog about that. Go check that out. I wrote a blog about the lies we tell ourselves. And yeah, I was able to really see my own mental disorder from a distance for the first time. And then I realized that I had put a lot of that unintentionally into Rio. She's a very unstable character, and that's just kind of her nature, and hopefully maybe she'll figure out how to get through that as the series goes on. There's only going to be about 4 books in this series, so it's not going to be a forever ongoing thing. So hopefully over time she figures that out, but honestly I haven't written those books yet, so who knows what her journey really is going to be when it comes to finding more emotional stability, or whether she'll even survive it. That's not a spoiler, I honestly don't know. A few things when writing unstable characters: be careful, okay? In general, like I said, I don't mean to offend people. I don't mean to make people feel like having a mental disorder or mental illness means there's something bad about you or there's something to be ashamed of, because it's not. I'm very open about my mental illness. I'm very open about my mental health journey in general and my spiritual health journey in general, because I don't think anyone should be ashamed of it. Still, it's necessary to be careful and do a lot of research if you're going to write a character like that, and if you're going to edit a character like that or anything, be sure to ask questions before you make assumptions. I think that's really, really important for any kind of editor, because I do freelance editing as well. I think it's important to ask questions from the author, ask questions about the characters before making specific assumptions about them, because for one, that could really tick off your writer. And for another thing, you don't know what people are experiencing. You don't know what they're going through. And if you write them a long letter disparaging a character who exhibits clear mental disorders and are openly diagnosed within the story, and you have a problem with that because you don't really understand people who suffer from certain types of mental illnesses, then that's kind of more on you, and that's something you really need to educate yourself about. But when it comes to writing those characters, especially educate yourself. Learn as much as you can, even if you're not someone who fits into that category. Learn as much as you can about that mental disorder, about that problem, so that you can try to portray it as sensitively and honestly as possible without, just kind of aggressively harming people or making people upset. Another thing to do is to pick up one of those emotion Thesaurus books, or one of those, anything in that series, or anything that can help you to display emotions through written word, because it's very different to see an emotion, to show an emotion on camera or on screen, than it is to write out what an emotion does to a person's body. Some things that I used in my book were, Rio has a tendency to kind of clench. She kind of shudders or tightens up when something's happening. She'll freeze, when there's something out of her control. She'll hold herself. Quite often, I think I had her just kind of holding herself or squeezing herself or squeezing her palms or something. So physical things to show emotional changes just in general is very helpful. Also, something I did learn in the editing process is that internal dialogue can be quite helpful for certain types of readers, because not every reader does pick up on cues the way some of the rest of us might. And I really like terse, kind of brief writing, but I did have to add a little bit more to kind of show the journey of her emotions, so that they aren't that sudden. Because in writing, you do want it to be as realistic as possible, but it's also writing. So you have to give your reader's brain a little bit of time to work and to understand the situation, to understand the transition from happy to suddenly angry, or from curious to suddenly dismissive. Okay, because these are real things, real thoughts that people have. People very quickly, especially someone in my situation whose brain works the way mine does, it's really easy to go from being curious about something to thinking, but that doesn't matter right now, okay? And there's a scene where one character is curious about something, but because of the circumstances they're in, because if he went after this thing that he's curious about, that would mean ignoring some other thing, or that would mean breaking the rules of some other I'm trying to really do this without giving any spoilers, but that would just mean, causing someone else to be upset if he went after this thing, and he realizes the person that he can make upset, like their feelings or their responses are more important than his curiosity at that time. And so he's like very curious about something, and then he's like, no, we still have to do the right thing. We still have to do this thing because the consequences of not doing this are bigger than the consequences of indulging that curiosity. I don't want to, I did a video on the editor already, but my editor wanted a little bit more to understand why he had those thoughts, even though he did kind of say out loud specifically why. It wasn't as clear. So I did give some more internal dialogue for the main character, for Rio, to kind of explain what she thought about his changing emotions. Hopefully it worked, hopefully it helped, but yeah, you do need to add a little bit of transition between emotions so that it's not as sudden as it would be in reality, as it would be for some of us. Again, the Emotion Thesaurus is a great resource for that. That whole series is an amazing resource. It's really important to display the emotions and the feelings that your character is going through within reason, because there is a point where you're showing too much. There should be a balance of showing and telling, and especially when writing a character that goes through a lot of emotional changes, that is not, that isn't just one stable way the whole time. It's really, really important that you pick and choose where to show that extreme emotion and where it should just be something that's noticed or something that's told or explained in some other way and is kind of almost brushed past. Brushed past seems a little bit too cavalier about it, but it's just something that you move through a little bit quickly in comparison to maybe some big turning points, to those big points where you don't want to overwhelm your reader with so many emotions that those really big points fall flat, okay? So you really want to have those emotional moments where you're still showing that this character is emotionally unstable, but they're understated almost, or they're a part of the action, they're part of the journey, and then there are these moments where you're focusing on those feelings, you're focusing on that rage, you're focusing on that sadness, that excitement, that extreme joy, whatever it is. Those extreme emotions have to be at the turning points, and then you also show that they're still a little bit unstable in between without getting too crazy at that time. Okay, so that's all I have for you about writing unstable characters. Just a quick recap. Do a lot of research. Make sure you understand your character's point of view as deeply and as realistically as possible. Be sensitive to people who may have that certain mental illness or certain experience. Talk to people. Learn about their experience if it's not your own. Do your research. Also, use the Emotion Thesaurus or any other resource that helps you show emotions clearly, but be very careful about where you show those emotions the most and where you kind of downplay them so that there is some balance in your story. And of course, ask questions. Ask questions of yourself. Ask therapists. Ask people who are dealing with these mental illnesses. Ask questions and try your best to be as sensitive and as truthful and as honest in your work, in your display. Even if this is in a fantasy setting, these are things that affect us all on a human level, and I think if you really try to get to that human aspect of it, even if you're showing emotions in a dragon, if you're really trying to connect with your reader, you have to have that human aspect. And at the end of the day, don't try to make stereotypes. Don't try to force people into certain boxes. Like I said, Rio came out the way she did. She always had a certain diagnosis, but her real imbalance came out the way it did because of my personal imbalances at the time that I started writing this book. So really ask the people, ask questions, and try to explore your answers through your writing and be sensitive and human about it. And, hopefully you're going to have someone who is relatable, someone who is beautiful in their own way, even when they're broken. Because all of us have felt pain, all of us have felt fear, all of us have felt these emotions that Rio experiences, and you know, I really, really hope that they're relatable. I hope that they touch people's hearts. And I hope that there are people who love and hate her, you know, both ends of the spectrum, because that is what it means to be human. You have emotions, you have experiences, and people respond with either love or dislike, and that's just natural. And I hope, for the most part, people understand her journey and understand her experiences and understand that she's not a neurotypical person. She's not going to do what you might expect a neurotypical person to do. And maybe many of the characters aren't because the writer wasn't. Who knows? You guys can let me know. Specifically Rio. She is not going to, she's not stable, and she's not mentally in a place where she's making all the right choices. She's not that kind of a character. She's a person who makes a lot of mistakes and who can sometimes make things worse, and whose decisions don't make sense to everyone around her. Hopefully, again, that's another good thing, use internal dialogue. In the internal dialogue, hopefully that helps the reader understand her, but the people around her still don't fully get it. We'll see how she turns out. I hope you enjoy the book. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this video. It was a very rambly video. I didn't actually plan what I was going to say before recording. I just knew that I wanted to talk about unstable characters and Rio's instability, and how it relates to my own personal experience. And hopefully you got something good out of it. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye.